Okay, so I also want to thank Michelle and Joe and others and Cyber Learning for putting this on. I'm really excited to be here. I'm assuming I'm going to learn a great deal, so I have a little bit to tell you. We'll see if that is of any use to you. This is a great song if you don't know it. It's by David Byrne. And I think when the call came to put this talk together, part of the question was, how did we get here? And so the song is a partial answer to this. So I actually think that this, the sort of compression of space and time in the lyrics to this song is probably an anthem for data scientists, and also it's a really good dance song. So I recommend it to you. In case I run off the rails, which often happens, this is what I want to do in my time with you. I want to argue that data science is an unfinished project in a variety of ways, and presents challenges to us as a field, but also challenges to society. I want to say we can still learn a lot from found objects, and I'll show you some examples of that, not nearly enough, but some. I want to make a pitch for learning by making places, and I think data has a great deal to do with that, contextualizing places, putting layers over places. And then I want to end with a project that actually Jennifer Kahn is working on in her dissertation, which is asking how youth would get personal with large-scale data sets, also known as big data. And maybe that'll help us understand how we got here, or at least it'll help you understand where I got to where I am, wherever that is. So I'm coming to you from the Spatial Learning and Mobility Lab. There are 3 of us, at least, here today. They're in yellow. Katie's here and Jennifer are here. So it's a group of old faculty. I guess I'm the oldest. Yeah, probably. A group of new faculty, Katie being one, and a group of aspiring faculty, Jennifer being a third. And we've really come to data science by being focused on how people think about and experience space, and in particular, embodied aspects of the mathematics of space and motion. That's where our activity started. So it overlaps with this field. I've known Andee for many, many years. Her work is fantastic. I've learned so much from her. So I just wanted to point out that we've had a persistent focus on data and its relationship to space. So speaking of spatial analysis and modeling in the wild, we have studied a number of professional work groups, digital archaeologists studying colonial succession in the highlands of Peru in this case. And I just wanted to give an example from the wild of what data-intensive work looks like in these practices. So what's going on in this image is that Tom, the lead archaeologist, is standing with a tough book with a model of the site that he's in. So he's standing inside the model and standing inside what the thing is modeling. He's using his own body to figure out if his paths through the settlement are correct. And he's using his own rate of walking to try and produce an estimate that will later be used to produce an effort surface over the entire settlement structure, calculating every point-wise trajectory as well as through the built environment of the settlement. And his question is about the succession from Incan to colonial resettlements under the Franciscan rule. And these people are very interested in both effort and seeing and being seen by elites inside the community. So our questions here is that there are, or what I want to argue here is that there are many large-scale data sets subtended in this activity, and that Tom is making one of them whose own a spectacular bit of spatial analysis and modeling by our reckoning. Data science is just this raw. It's an unfinished project. There are all kinds of new activities popping up all the time. This is actually the sequence in which this little tune structure shows Tom walking like an Incan from a settlement to a plaza site in the space that these guys are studying. So Tom's walking like an Incan in the tune strip. What is the data here? Whose body stands in for Incan bodies? What is a case here, and what is an aggregate? And I would argue that this is the bleeding edge of medium-scale data science. Is this somehow like analyzing Twitter streams, which is another form of data that people are interested in here, perhaps. What's going on such that all of these diverse conceptual practices are called data science? Since we study scientific work groups, we read the social studies of science literature, and I just wanted to bring a couple of things to your attention here. We approach data science as social scientists. We're coming late to the party. As Venturini and his colleagues say, like rural countries pushed to a sudden industrialization with the massification of large-scale data. So as social scientists, we see data as social, something made to reflect particular interests with attendant thinning and erasure of competing ontologies, the quote from Bush on the bottom. Data science is unfinished not only because we're developing new tools, but also because ontologies drift and subtend each other. Part of the project is a critical social science of data science. So I'm also thinking of Thomas Phillip, who's in the room here and is working on these kinds of issues. In case you are an Esri fan, I'm going to pre-apologize. In case Esri sometimes infuriates you, you're on board with me. So there's a lot to learn from found objects, right? Surely there are Esri fans and detractors in this workshop. The Esri tapestry engine is as sinister as it is beautiful. If, as Coursera and Jacques Mackinlay tell us, storytelling is the next step in visualization, what stories are told through narrative segmentation in a tool like Esri tapestry? So again, drawing from the Bush quote, one might well ask, is the ontology produced by a given approach to data collection and analysis the one we want to produce? Does it allow for other competing ontologies? And, just in case, I used to live within walking distance of this building. And my zip code is highlighted in tapestry here. My recollection is that as a junior professor on the tenure track in this city, I was a house poor, caffeine-fueled, like I am now, high-anxiety mess with small children. Did Esri tapestry, did the narrative cover my life story? Would I or my neighbors at the time tell a counter story about living in Berkeley? And you can check your own zip code. This is what I might be. A trendsetter. I kind of doubt that. Urban chic, pretty sure I'm not that too. Okay. So that's an example, I think, of large-scale data sets that are being gathered and used for purposes that may not align very well with the kinds of things we're interested in. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. This, I think, is a spectacular found object. And this came from a long time ago, and it blew our minds. This comes before any of the work we ever did here. This is, I should read it and be safe. So while we're learning from found objects, here's one that blew our minds in the Space Learning and Mobility group, the SLAM Lab group, and led to an entire line of work on GPS drawing and walking scale geometries. And I'm not talking about that in this talk. The data story told by developers about a commons area in Cambridge in the United Kingdom was that it was too swampy to be of use to the public. A group stepped up with GPS units and strapped up with GPS units and walked through every accessible area in the commons. The resulting thematic map on the right-hand side halted the development. So here we see counter-mapping and counter-storytelling in the wild. And we think these are real prospects for civic engagement with large-scale data. And we think a social science and data science should be doing these things. That's why it's an unfinished business. What am I doing next? Okay. This is a bit of a shift, but using location-aware devices, which produce tons of position data through time, right, to capture personal mobility could, I'm not sure it yet has, tell us a great deal about how people learn and develop as they make places in their everyday life. So here, drawing from Roger Hart's study of children in Vermont, these 1970 kids in Vermont inhabit and make a community that is unknown for the most part to their parents. This is what they do with their elective time, right? Space is what we find in maps, for example, isometries and surfaces for wayfinding. Place is what we do in space. We take place as organisms, as historical actors. And learning involves and can be driven by place making. So we're making some big bets on this. Here's a scene from at the time, 10-year-old young woman named Laura. She draws a map of her school. I've gone in after the fact and taken a panorama of spots that she finds both desirable and frightening in her school. She knows a lot about the spatial distribution of her activities, right? There are places in this school that are good and places that are bad. So passive uses of GPS tracking produce images of daily mobility, what we would call the daily round of a person. Movement reflects substantive constraints of time geography, borrowing ideas from Torsten Hagerström, places you can reach given your schedule and means of mobility. The panoramas continue to be of interest to us, although we've never done very much with those, but I think those are things kids could produce as data in place. This is Laura's time density surface over her neighborhood, showing what she does on a typical school day and showing what she does on a typical Saturday. She's a soccer player. She goes to the recycling center with her mom. And jump forward in time. These are time geography images of kids who have just built a bicycle out of discarded parts. This is from Katie Taylor's dissertation. And they are trying to figure out where they can get in their neighborhood, and their neighborhood happens to also be a food desert, so a great deal of their efforts are around where they can go to help their mom with grocery shopping. So this comes from Katie's dissertation, youth riding bicycles they built. The captured track data is explored by groups of youth peers. Some of it was hilarious, their accusations of each other's subterranean activities, and they're using it to ground truth official maps of the city. What youth desired was often invisible to adults, again. The data of participatory urban planning poorly captured youth voices and desires. And Katie organized several design charrettes in which youth were in conversation with professionals, city planners, cartographers, the mayor's office to discuss youth recommendations. The youth created and performed counter maps that led to new bike routes, and interesting, Katie's methods were ransacked by the planners and used on her as a resident of the city within a period of about a month. She was randomly selected to do what she'd been asking these kids to do. So, wait a minute. Yeah, we're still here.
That qualifies as a big success.
Huh?
That qualifies as really
Yeah, we thought so, certainly. I want to say a few other bits here. Jumped ahead too fast. So youth were learning on the move. This is a phrase I would credit to Katie. And their awareness of cultural amenities in and around their neighborhoods increased along with their elective mobility. This led to some concerns on the part of their parents. Learning takes place in the city. Learning makes place in the city. And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? This next bit is my take on a charge to imagine youth learning in data science as an unfinished project. And I just want to say a few things about this. We've been looking now at personal mobility as one layer of ubiquitous data, but these data are typically not open to personal inspection or use. The same is true of data layers made of consumption or social relationships, what you buy and who you share with on Facebook and things like that. So what do youth understand about these digital traces? Bruno Latour calls them digital traces. And here's a cascade of increasingly ambitious answers. We were talking about this over dinner last night. Youth are unwitting provisioners. They opt in order to use the software. They have no idea what's going on. Think Pokemon Go. A little more ambitious, youth are active consumers. And active means they're using the data to do something they want to do, potentially, right? Not super ambitious with respect to statistical inference. A third possibility, and I talked at some length with folks, Janet in particular, about this last night, thinking of youth as foragers and commentators on stories told with data. So if I think about how I spend my mornings, I'm becoming caffeine crazed, I'm reading the paper, and I'm curating out stories that interest me with respect to data. And then I talk about those things with my students, or they listen to me talk, more likely, for much of the rest of the day. So that's a practice that I think many people are engaged in. They're exchanging these kinds of stories. So foraging and dissection of data stories is an interesting form of cultural activity. It may be more widespread than we think, and it may not be a bad target for what we want kids to do, right? It gets more ambitious. Thanks. Oh boy, that's not good. Youth as critics of data or of stories untold because of the way data are used. And youth as makers or tellers of stories with data. Now, this is the most ambitious, I think. We're working on this. I don't share this vision, but I think many people anticipate a legion of little, maybe friendlier Nate Silvers. If you know who Nate Silver is. And his squabbles with the current data, the data morgue at the New York Times, you get the friendly illusion. Okay, very quickly, and then I want to end with something that's going to be on Jennifer's poster. So this is just an example of making places in the city, learning, using data, but the data now are archival information that is trapped in museums and libraries, and we're trying to get kids involved in producing metadata that will actually index and project that into the city neighborhoods that information is about. So I'm shifting out from data as numerical descriptions of qualities of stuff to often narrative or other kinds of media, photographs, oral history, music, that describe place. How do we produce index structures that allow people to jailbreak that information out of archives? These are kids in a beautiful space documenting the history of civil rights activism in the Music City where I live. This is how that activity is set up. They are on Beam to develop digital spatial storylines. They end up working behind the scenes in the archives to try and generate some geocoding for the material they're finding. Then they go out on the street and build tour-like objects. Those tour-like objects involve them enacting things that have happened in the past in sort of a palimpsestic way. So they are reenacting a sit-in in the place where the sit-in happened in 1959, but of course they're doing this circa 2014. We think, this is kind of an odd graphical rendering of it, but cool. We think it has some this inaction has some interesting properties as youth are indexing and carrying archival material into the street. We now have sort of new technologies that allow kids to build these as tour-like objects that others can take and associate media with things that are happening in place. This is part of the civil rights movement in 1960 that ended the segregation of downtown businesses. And these forms of technology and forms of tour making, storytelling, are ways of telling and reading the city through the archives and at the same time freeing the information in the archives so that it's usable at the street level. So a form of data science, I think. And of course, everything they're doing can also be tracked and so can be dumped into other analytic tools that look at the co-location of people in time and space, back to this time geography metaphor I started with. I just want to end with this. I think I have enough time to end. So this is something that's just completed like last week. It's not completed, it's like it was wherever we're at last week. And this is storytelling with big data. This is done in a public library. Jennifer is there standing with me, and these are some of our colleagues in this work. The point here is to try and figure out why youth would be interested in data and what stories they would want to tell with that data, understood as a problem of getting personal with large-scale data sets. What's the personal connection for kids? And what Jennifer has asked them to do is to begin to explore the question, what moves families, and my family in particular, as they create what we're calling family data storylines. This image shows youth, after they've built these, with their parents coming back for a presentation in the public library, standing along a timeline in which they get to choose where their ancestors first came to the United States. 2/3 of these kids are African American kids. Most of them are not entirely sure where their ancestors came from as they look backwards in time. They tend to pick grandparents or great-grandparents. And what we know as data scientists is that as you look backwards in the record of US Census data, this is back to the alternate ontologies point and kind of a critical point, at about 18, as you move from now back to 1860, African Americans are represented in the ontology of the census as people. But as soon as you pass 1860, they become property. And they lose their names. It's almost impossible to find them. So even in the census, set out by Thomas Jefferson in 1790, the ontic quality of things that you have data about shifts dramatically. And these kids and their parents are standing in that ontological shift. So one of the things we're interested to try and understand, this is kids working with their parents, showing their parents how to use Social Explorer and the census data, are things like, and now I can't really see this, but personal stories or narratives here are not the same as data stories. And the space between them appears to be a fertile one for design. There are really very basic properties of the production of talk that are interesting with respect to shifts in footing that align the granularity of this family story with the granularity of the data. And telling family data storylines, how do you step out from the sort of origin point of their own bodies here and now? How do they step into historical actors in a way that preserves meaning and intimacy, which we're calling processes of jumping through biogeography. And I am done. Thanks.